Hey everybody, this is the first lesson of Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the elements of music. So Lesson 1 is going to be basics. So we're going to talk about the music staff, what it is, what it looks like, and how to draw it. Then we're going to move on to clefs, and we're going to talk about bass and treble clefs, which are the two most common clefs in music. And we're going to talk about the C clef, which includes the alto clef and the tenor clef. And we're going to talk about how to draw all three of those, and we're going to talk about the pitches on the staff and where each pitch is for each clef. And we are going to talk about sharps and flats and how they affect pitches, and also how to draw them as well. And then we're going to talk about dynamic markings and how to draw them. Well, they're letters, but and then we're going to talk about what they are and what they do and how they work. So we're going to flip the camera angle here and get started on talking about the music staff. Okay guys, so now we're going to talk about the music staff. So first I want to thank mywhiteboards.com for making really awesome music staff whiteboards. So this is what I'm using for my lessons. You can use printed sheet music. You can go to your local music store and get a book of sheet music, or you can go on to blanksheetmusic.net and get free sheet music online. You can print out as many copies as you want. You can put all the different clefs on it. You can put out time signatures and anything you really want. Okay, so so most basic thing is the music staff, and that's what the music is written on. So this is a music staff whiteboard, and it has music staffs on it. So a music staff is a series of 5 lines, and they go across your sheet of paper or your whiteboard, and this is the basis for all of the music you'll write. So the staff refers to one single set of 5 lines, and you see this has 4 staffs on it. When you have a combination of staffs, like in piano music, you have 2 for the piano, or if you're doing something with like a percussion section in it, and it'll be bracketed together, that's called a system. So a system is any combination of 2 or more staffs. So this is just, right now it's just a blank staff until I write stuff on it. Okay, so that's the music staff. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about are bass and treble clefs. So a bass and treble clef are the 2 main clefs that we use in music, and basically it's a signification of what the positioning of notes on a staff is. So bass clef, it's a certain series of notes, it signifies a line as a certain note or another, and on the treble clef signifies that it's a different pattern. So let me talk about drawing the bass in treble clef. So first, I'm going to draw a treble clef. So the most important thing about the treble clef is that second line from the bottom. So you're going to start right underneath it, and you're going to loop around it like that. Come down, hit the bottom line, and come up and around. And then when you hit the halfway point, you're going to come up and curve the other way. You're going to go slightly past the top line and straight down. Then you're going to go past through the bottom and curly cue it up at the bottom there. That's a treble clef. That's how you draw a treble clef. Okay? Now to do a bass clef, the most important line is the second line from the top. Okay? So you're going to start slightly under the second line from the top, and you're going to go and loop around, come up to the top line, and curve around back to the bottom, down to the bottom line. Then you're going to put one dot here and one dot here. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about what the placement of notes are on the staff momentarily, but another name for each of these clefs is the G clef and the F clef. So when you're trying to figure out what the notes are, an easy way to think is that this line here, the important line for the treble clef, is G, because it wraps around that line. That's G on the treble clef. Now, the bass clef is also called the F clef because that line, the most important line, is the second line. That is an F, and the two dots go on either side of the F line. Okay? So that's something, a little trick you can have in your head to help you remember where the notes are, or at least one of each note for each clef. Okay? So now we're going to talk about notes or pitches. So generally, I'm going to start generally without either of the clefs. I'm going to talk about what the notes are. So each note or pitch is signified by a letter A through G. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now when you get to G, it starts over again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then it starts over again. So, so you take those letter names and they become assigned to a note or a pitch. Well, that's the note. The letters are the pitch. The note is physically what's written. And, you know, a note you can is pretty commonly known to look like that. Or have the stem the other way. But either way. So that's a note. The letter name is the pitch. Pitch is basically what is sounding, and a note is what is written. Okay, so let me flip this back over, and I'll draw a treble clef. And we're going to talk about the notes on the treble clef. So there's two little catchphrases that you can remember for what the notes are on a treble clef. And one is for the spaces, and one is for the lines. So for the lines, you can think of every good boy does fine. So what it is every good boy does fine. E, G, B, D, F. Alright? So think every good boy does fine, and that's all the lines for treble clef. Then for the spaces, think of the word face. So F, A, C, E. Face. Alright? So, if you want to write that down, or snapshot that screen, that is the notes for the treble clef. Every good boy does fine, and face. Okay? So that's treble clef. Now we'll move on to bass clef. So I'll draw my bass clef. Boop. Okay, so now for this, the lines are, the anagram for it is good boys do fine always. So it's good boys do fine always. G, B, D, F, A. Now, for the spaces, it's not as simple as face, but there is another anagram for that, and that's all cows eat grass. All cows eat grass. Or ace G. Okay? So that's, if you want to screen grab that or write that down. I'm also going to throw that in the notes that I'll include a link for in the description. I'll have like a Dropbox link to the a Word document or a PDF of the notes for all this. So you can check that out. Okay, so now let's talk about ledger lines. Okay, so let me erase this here. And I'll keep the bass clef. We'll start with the bass clef. Most people start with treble clef, but you can start with either one. So, so a ledger line is a line that extends beyond the 5 lines. Okay? Because, you know, you're sitting there, you're going, okay, well, you got all cows eat grass and good boys do fine always. But what happens when you go beyond the lines and spaces that are already part of the staff? And that's where ledger lines come in. So a ledger line is you add one tiny little piece of an extra line. Just like that. And it becomes a new note area, a new line to put a note. So, if you noticed when we had our all cows eat grass and good boys do fine always on there, if you go line to space to line to space, it goes in order. G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So you notice that there's a pattern. It just goes, if you go line, space, line, space, line, space, or space, line, space, line, space, line, it goes in order, letter order, until you get back to G, and then it goes to A, and then it goes back to G, and then back to A, and so on and so forth with those letters. So when you get to G, it goes to A. So if we have a ledger line here, how are you supposed to figure that out? Alright, it's not in the anagram. Well, if you know by good boys do fine always that this top line here is an A, then this next space here below this ledger line would be a B. So if you continue doing that to that ledger line would be a C. Okay? So that's how ledger lines work, and you can theoretically go infinitesimally up and down with ledger lines. You can put, boop, 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 boop. If you have all the space in the world, you're doing it on an electronic note writing system, or you just have one staff on a piece of paper, you could theoretically just go down as many ledger lines as you want. Okay, it's just a matter of counting, just going through the cycle of notes. Okay, so with that being said, let me write a treble clef, and it works the same way with treble clef. So let me write a treble clef. Okay, and let me talk about, this might be something, if you've been in band or choir or, just general music in general, you may have seen something similar to this. This is called a grand staff, and that's when a treble clef and a bass clef are together in one thing. Okay, so how do these relate to each other? Because they all have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but do they have the same notes? And no, they don't. They can, but they'd be written differently. So right now we have a grand staff, okay? And so we have A here. So you have A, B, C. So that's from the bass clef. Now let's go into the treble clef, and let's go to this bottom line here. E, D, C. Whoa. You see that? If you go up 3 to C, it's one ledger line up. And if you go down 3 on the treble clef, it's also a C, one ledger line below. Now, by process of elimination, you would think that must be the same exact C, and you'd be right. That's the same C. That's what we call middle C, or, as I'll get to in a moment or two, C4. Like boom, goes the dynamite. Alright, so that's a C4, or middle C. And that is a shared note between the two staffs. Okay? Now, when you have a grand staff, you can write the A 2 ledger lines below that, which is the same as there on the bass clef staff. This is the bass clef staff here, and this is the treble clef staff there. These are the same A, but they're written differently. Just like I could write 3 ledger lines up. That's on the bass clef right there. That's bass clef. That's a G. Okay? If I wrote that on the treble clef, it's there. These are the same A's, and these are the same G's. Okay? So it's a matter of, if you're writing on a grand staff, it's a matter of, do I want to write 15 ledger lines, or should I write that in the treble clef staff? Okay? So that's how that works there. So, this creates a system called identifying the register. Okay? And the easiest way to do this is to base it off of the note C. Okay, so I'm just going to erase these. The note C, because we have our C4 is right here. C4. Okay, and that's the the middle part between the two clefs on the grand staff, middle C. Okay, so if we go down to the next C, and you can just trust me that that's a C, but if you count, you'll see that I'm correct. That will be C3. Okay, if you go down to the next C, boop, boop, 2 ledger lines below that, that is C2. And that goes all the way down to C0. And if you're playing on a piano, an actual piano, it'll go down to A0, which is 3 notes below, it's 3 notes below C0. Okay? Now if you go up to the next C, from C4, right there, that's C5. So every note between that one and that one will be the register below it. So if I wrote that G right here, that would be a G2. Okay? If I wrote the G here, that's a G3. So if it's below, if you think of it like C, use these C's as check marks or checkpoints. If a note is lower than one particular C, it is like this G, for example. It's lower than C3, so it's not a G3. It's above the C2, so it's a G2. Okay? This G is below C4, so it's not a G4, it's a G3. This G here is below the C5 and above the C4. It is a G4, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how the registers work. And you can theoretically go from 0 to infinity. But you wouldn't be able to hear anything past C8. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Seacliffs. Okay, so first I'm going to do 2 very common Seacliffs, but not nearly as common as bass or treble clef, and that's the alto clef and the tenor clef. So first, the alto clef, you draw a line, and then you draw sort of like a B with a little flat part in the middle. Okay, so that's the alto clef. The tenor clef is very similar. In fact, all the C clefs look exactly the same. That's an alto clef. All of the C clefs look exactly the same, except their positioning is different. So you draw another line, then you draw a B with a little flat part, just like that. Now, when you notice the difference between the alto clef and the tenor clef, the alto clef has this line running through the B, and the tenor clef has this line running through the B. Okay? Now, there's a little key to why it's called a C clef, and that is because a C clef, whatever line is running through the B is the note C4. So this line is C4. When you have an alto clef, And I'll just draw one right here. This line is C4. If you draw another C clef that is not either of those, so I'll draw another one in a different position. Okay, that's just another C clef. It's not an alto clef or a tenor clef. This line is C4. Okay, so that's why it's called a C clef. So, you know, they're a little tricky because it's not something we work on all the time to memorize where the notes are, but it's really simple to figure out what the notes are or where the notes are for any C clef by just remembering that the line that goes through the B is C4. Okay? So, the alto clef, this is very common. Well, it's used to play viola. The viola music is written with alto clef. And the tenor clef is used very frequently with trombone music when they play really, really high music. Instead of writing everything in bass clef and having a lot of ledger lines, they'll use this to kind of bring everything down a little bit when they're playing really, really high music. So that's the C clef. Okay, so now we're going to talk about sharps and flats. So, sharps and flats, we don't need to write a clef. You know, I'll just write a treble clef, just to make it simple. Okay, so here's a treble clef. So, I'm going to write a G. So that's a G. And I'm going to write a sharp in front of it. Whoop. There. So that now becomes a G sharp, which is halfway in between a G and an A. So in order, I'll just write this. Here is a G. So I'll write a G. And then I will write a G sharp. Let me rewrite that. A little cleaner. Boop, boop. It's a little hashtag symbol if you're a younger person, or a pound symbol if you're a little bit older. Or just quite simply a number sign. But it's just like a little tic-tac-toe board. And then an A. So there's your G and there's your A. That G sharp is right smack dab in the middle between these two notes. And that applies to any note other than B and E, which I'll get into once I explain what a flat is. So, flats do exactly the opposite. It goes down. So, So, a sharp goes up, a half step it's called. So between a G and an A is a whole step. And between a G and a G sharp, or between the G sharp and the A, is a half step. Okay? And we will get into that when we get into scales. But for now, just know that the G sharp is halfway in between the note that it is and the note right above it. Now a flat is the opposite. It is still halfway in between. However, it's a different way of writing, because it will be halfway in between the note that it is and the note right below it. So I'll write a G again, and then a G flat, which is like a tiny little B, the letter B, a lowercase b, and then I will write an F. Okay? Now that G flat is right smack dab between the G and the F. It's halfway between. Okay? Now, with a sharp and a flat, they could potentially be the same note or the same pitch, but a different note, a different way of writing it. Now I'll explain that with going back to G and using the G sharp again. Use something familiar. We have our G, and then we have our G sharp, and then we have our A. I'll leave a little room for Mr. Flat there. But, so we have our G and our A, and our G sharp is halfway in between. Now, what if I wrote an A flat? The G sharp and the A flat are the same pitch, but a different written note. That is called an enharmonic. Okay? Both the G sharp and the A flat are halfway in between the G and the A. It's just a different way of writing it. And once we get into scales, we'll explain why there's sharps and why there's flats, and why don't we write everything with sharps or everything with flats. So, but that is for next week. Now we can have things called a double flat and a double sharp. Now, let me go back to my G here in Treble Clef, and I'll write a G double sharp. So what it is, you write your G, and then the double sharp is an X, just like that. Now, if one sharp brings it halfway between the G and the A double sharp should be the same thing as the A, and that's correct. If that's what you're thinking, that is exactly correct. Now, this G double sharp, and that's how you say it, G double sharp, is also an A. It's the same pitch as the A, but it's a different written note as the A, than the A. Which is not used very often, but is used occasionally based on what scale you're using and how you alter it. So just know that a double sharp is 2 half steps or 2 sharps above the note that it is. So you have your G, and then you double sharp it. It sounds like an A, but it's written as a D double sharp, a G double sharp, I mean. Now, same thing. You have a G, and then I can write a G double flat, which is literally 2 flat symbols mushed together like that. Now, if a double sharp goes up 2 sharps, then a double flat goes down 2 flats. So the note below G is an F. So that double flat, that G double flat, is also an F. Okay? Okay. So, same as the double sharp, just it's flat and it goes down. Alright? So just know that a double sharp is 2 sharps and a double flat is 2 flats. And they work like adding an extra sharp or adding an extra flat. Okay? And can enharmonically be the same as a natural note. A natural note being a note that does not have a sharp or a flat, like a G or an F or an A is a natural note because it doesn't have a sharp or a flat before it. Okay, now speaking of naturals, there is a natural symbol. And what the purpose of the natural symbol is that if I wrote that G and then I wrote a G double flat there, if I wrote another G right next to it, by the rules of music, that flat, if it's in the same measure, a measure being a line that separates an amount of music, and I'll get into that in the next section here. If you, by the rules of music, if that flat, double flat is there in the middle of the measure, and the measure has not finished yet, that second, or that third G is still a G double flat, because that accidental, or sharp or flat, is overall called an accidental. That accidental will carry over to the next note if it doesn't say otherwise. So, to make that back to a G natural, rewrite the G natural symbol. Okay? And that's basically like half of a sharp. So basically you draw a little box. Okay? So I'll start that over. You draw a little box like that, and then you draw a line up, and you draw a line down. Just like that. That is a natural symbol, and that makes a flat or a sharp note back to a regular natural note. Okay? And that's accidentals. So the last section we're going to talk about today is dynamic markings. So dynamic markings are how loud or soft the music is supposed to be played. So if a trumpet player is playing music and he's playing ooh or ah, that will be written in as a dynamic marking. There's an infinitesimal amount of dynamic markings, as we'll talk about, but I'll give the most common ones. Okay, so the first one is a double P, or pianissimo. And all of this is going to be like underneath the staff. So like there's a staff. It'll be like right underneath. So you have pianissimo, which is 2 P's. Then you have 1 P, piano. Okay. And that's spelled exactly like the instrument name. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then the next one we have is mezzo piano. Mezzo is Italian for middle or medium. And it's spelled M-E-Z-Z-O, mezzo, but it's pronounced mezzo. Then the next dynamic marking we have is MF, or mezzo forte. Okay. The next one we have is 1F, and that is forte. Now when you have mezzo, it's medium or middle. So you have piano, and then you have forte. So this is like medium soft and medium loud. Mezzo piano and mezzo forte. Now back to the forte. After forte we have double F. Fortissimo. Okay? Now, these are the most common ones. Pianissimo to fortissimo. Okay? And you can theoretically go infinitesimally in each direction by adding another P or adding another F. So you can go 3 Fs, and that is called fortissimo. Or if you add a third P, that's pianissimo. Okay? So when you add an extra P or an extra F, you add an extra issa to the name. Pianissimo. fortissimo. Okay, and you can, so if you have 5 P's, you go pianissimo, or fortissimo, and you just keep adding issas. Or you could just say 5 F's, 6 F's, 27 F's. You could theoretically go on and on and on forever and ever. These are the most common ones. Pianissimo, 2 P's, or fortissimo, 2 F's. Those are the most common ones. Now, you might be asking, well, why is that P symbolized for piano? Isn't that an instrument? Yes, and the name actually came from the dynamic marking, because before the piano, the instrument, the piano, the only term that piano was used for was for the dynamic marking. Now, when they invented the piano, first you had the harpsichord, which is like a piano that plucks strings. Then they invented the piano, but the full name was called pianoforte, based off of piano and forte. And the reason they did that was because they named it that was because a harpsichord could not play dynamics. It played one dynamic, or if it was a really advanced harpsichord, you would have 2 keyboards, and one would play quietly and one would play loudly. So the piano, which was then called the pianoforte, or the forte piano in some places, was named such because it could play dynamically all the way from piano to forte, or from forte down to piano. So they named it the pianoforte or the forte piano, and eventually it just got shortened to piano. So those are dynamics, and this is the end of our first lesson. So let me flip the camera back around. So that was the first lesson. The next lesson will be posted next Thursday. And we're going to continue on with the next chapter in the book. We'll keep chugging along. So in the description, I'm going to post a Dropbox link to notes, some written notes that I'm going to type out, and you can download the PDF of the notes of this chapter of everything we went through in this lesson. And I will also create a little worksheet, and you can download that. There will be 2 files. There will be the worksheet without answers and the worksheet with answers. And so you can download the worksheet without answers, do the worksheet, see how you do, and then you can download the worksheet with answers, and you can check your answers. So the links for that will be in the description below this video. And please subscribe so you can get lessons every week. So you can catch next week's lessons on Thursday. And, share with your friends at school, in your band, your mom, if your mom wants to learn music theory, just share, send a link out, be like, hey, check out this, channel, it's doing some music theory stuff. Show it to your band director, show it to your choir director, show it to your private teacher, just kind of spread the word. I really want to spread this out and, really, expand, the musical world. So before we end here, I want to give a shout out to mywhiteboard.com again for having awesome whiteboards. I got that at mywhiteboard.com. I want to give a shout out to blanksheetmusic.net. I'll put the link in the description for that. Or go to your local music store, and pick up a book of blank sheet music if you want it in a nice spiral bound book or whatever. So That's the end of this lesson, and I'll catch you guys in a week with lesson number 2.